Yama everyone, welcome to our little Zoom panel that we've got going for United Nations Human Rights Day. First of all, I just want to acknowledge that I'm coming to you from Gadigal and Wangal country in Sydney and pay my respects to the elders past and present, as well as those mob that are on the ground doing the work every day. And I just want to acknowledge to the land that you're coming on and coming from, and your ancestors past, the ancestors of your land past and present. I'm going to pop, if you're not sure whose land you're on, I'm just going to pop in the chat the IATSIS map of Indigenous Australia, so you can check out where you're from. So I guess we'll get started by introducing those who are with us today. We've got Stacey Campton. She is an Aboriginal woman from Gungari country in southwestern Queensland. Stacey has been teaching and policy development qualifications and lived experience working in First Nations affairs for over 30 years in all sectors, so government, education, and more recently not-for-profit. Stacey is a senior director at Children's Ground, working on systems change and access by our people to self-determine their education, health, and economic independence in holistic ways. She provides secretariat support for Interi Ampumpa, sorry, I'm still getting my words right here because it's not my language. We've got Pauline Grant, Pawpaw. She's the First Nations coordinator at Children's Ground, responsible for learning, health and wellbeing at Nucky's Lagoon community in Darwin. And Kathy Thompson is a First Nations learning, health and wellbeing educator at 15 Mile community in Darwin. So I guess we'll kick off with a question for Stacey. Stacey, can you give us a bit of a background on Children's Ground and what we do in the First Nations education space, and Uchera Pampa, and what is it that you're trying to achieve?
Thanks, Maddie. Hi, everybody. Good to see you, Kathy and Pawpaw, and I see Aunty Steff has come on as well, so we'll get to see her in a minute as she gets through the cyberspace. I'd also like to acknowledge that I'm on Ngunnawal Ngambri land today, and I travel between Wurundjeri and Ngambri on a regular basis just for work and family, mainly family, but I also work with Mobbing Top End and Central Australia as well. And yeah, deliver on some of the strategic development for Children's Ground. Just a little bit about background about Children's Ground. We're a First Nations organisation, and we were basically created to overcome injustice, inequity and disadvantage. Children's Ground founders and communities we support have developed and implemented the Children's Ground approach, which is part of community. It's not just a service. It's who we are and what we stand for. The approach front loads resources into equitable access and prevention. It's designed to address the systemic failures that perpetuate extreme disadvantage and to evidence a model of change, or systems change that we're looking for. It is founded on the oldest knowledge systems in the world and is informed by leading national and international practice. The Children's Ground approach can be implemented by any organisational group of organisations to achieve sustained long-term change. As First Nations people, we want our children to have a different future where they are respected, they have access to high-quality education, high-quality employment and high-quality health, and can celebrate their social, cultural and economic inclusion. Children's Ground has been designed to achieve this outcome. To change the status quo, we need to radically change the way the system operates. Children's Ground has reformed 5 key areas to redress the current system failings and to evidence a new system to achieve long-term impact. That is governance. We work on a bottom-up process, not a top-down. Service delivery, where we're about preventative and integrated services, not crisis responses. Workforce, we're about local and long-term employment opportunities for First Nations workers and not short-term fly-in, fly-outs. Investment, we're long-term and collective. We're about everybody in the community. not short-term and just project-based, and evidence. Outcomes-based, impact, First Nations-led. We do our own research. We do our own research on our communities and ourselves, and we collect that information for us. Outputs are based on, and as opposed to the current system, which is output-based and what and how many. Always looking at the numbers rather than the qualitative in the story. So today we're talking about First Nations education system as a change system. It's about, part of the United Nations human rights of Indigenous peoples, the Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, and our rights to be able to teach our kids on country, in language, our ways of knowing, our ways of being. The consideration and approach of the First Nations education system is not new. First Nations people have been self-determining their education for over 65,000 years. It's been interrupted for the last 240 plus years. In the 70s, probably more specifically 76 to 83, there was a strong movement, and one of many, to build and grow and deliver a First Nations controlled school for First Nations children from the town camps around Mabantwa. This school was called Yipirinya, and it still exists today. Yipirinya was born to break the constraints of the settler colonial stranglehold on education outcomes in UNT, and to realise self-determination and self-management for First Nations children, people, communities and families. The development and continued existence of Yipirinya School was to challenge the control of Indigenous futures, because that was what the control of education meant in those times. It took many years of lobbying to achieve school registration for Yipirinya. It should be an inspiration to the relentless strength of those First Nations visionaries that have gone before us. The timing is right again to revisit, reconsider and reinvest in a First Nations education system, but a national one this time. What should it look like this time? What are the principles for ensuring the role of First Nations education is successful in a world that is obsessed with Western concepts and contexts of learning? How do First Nations children grow strong in identity, language, kinship, knowing country and knowing relationships and processes, rather than a structure of rote learning and rote systems? That is what we want to discuss today, and also continue the good work begun 65,000 years ago, where First Nations ways of knowing, being and doing provided the foundation of our knowledge systems. So I'm looking forward to that discussion and contribution from our panellists, and looking forward to any questions that anybody might have of us out there. And I'm more than happy to provide more information about Uchera Pumpa. It's a ground up movement, grassroots movement of First Nations educators who've come together over the last few years. We put a call out through Children's Grounds, seeing if there was any First Nation educators who wanted to come and talk about what they're teaching, what they're providing for their kids on country, what language looks like, what curriculum looks like, what does a First Nations education workforce look like. So all of those types of things. And we had a large number of nations attend our first meetings, and then we went into COVID lockdown. So we had to provide a lot of that stuff online. So over the last couple of years, we've done a lot of work with the people that have attended, the teachers and cultural professors that have attended, the linguists, the experts in our language attended these forums, and we've gotten together on a couple of times a year to talk about curriculum, what does a First Nations education system look like, and what do we want to see, and what changes do we want to see, and what investment we would like our governments and others to make. We're holding another one next year. We had one earlier this year, and we're holding another one next year. And we invite any First Nations educator to come along and join us in this movement, in this conversation around where we want to see change and what does that change look like. But happy to talk about that more as we progress through this conversation today. I'll hand it back to you, Maddie.
Thanks, Stacey. So now we're going to go to our top-end educators, Paw and Kathy. I think everyone's probably really interested to hear about what it's like working on the ground and what you do day to day. So I guess, first of all, what do you do in your community? And either of you can answer this. What do you do in your community in your learning and wellbeing program that showcases and highlights the First Nations education system?
Yep, 15 mile. So on Mondays, it's our bush trip, and Wednesdays we're in community. But it's with my community, it's very important, you know, with the bush trips and stuff being a lot of the families that are in Darwin, so we're situated in Darwin, they're not actually living on their homeland, so they're not, you know, getting their right bush medicines or, you know, hunting, gathering or whatever. So Monday, yes, we're out on country, bush trips, hunting, you know, gathering bush tucker, bush plants, medicines, which, you know, it's very important as for our people. That's natural, it's our way, you know, that's our culture. When we're on Wednesdays, we're, you know, learning to teach kids in languages, and it's pretty up here. It's there's a lot of different communities and languages in our community in Nucky's Lagoon. So it's, yeah, parents are coming. We like to teach the first language, and kids. It's just very important because, yeah, that's what we need. It's who we are. It's our identity to live our way. And yeah, it's just, what else we do?
Yeah, we learn of each other's culture and languages as well. So we have different tribes, like people from different communities coming up visit sometimes. People that live in the community, like we have like 6 to 10 different clan groups from all over the top end. I myself had family, my uncle that used to married from down in Tennant Creek, Alice Springs. All the in-laws come up as well throughout the 80s, 90s. But yeah, so we learned off each other and helping each other, you know, through cultural learning and stuff.
Yeah, it's very important for us, you know, to be, you know, still keeping our culture alive and, you know, teaching our young ones, you know, younger generations to keep us going and strong, you know, like, and to keep it in community, to keep it in our homelands, because that's who we are. And that's, yeah, we gotta, you know, yeah, that's just makes us who, as a whole, as Indigenous people. But we also, you know, do a lot of health promotions as well, just with our programs with young kids and families. Sorry? Yeah. We got, and also, you know, got here 15 mile. We got our own community gardens up and running. It's, you know, it's very important. We've got a few bush medicine plants growing because that's what family wants. You know, it's natural. So got to keep it our way. We also do a lot of healthy routines, cooking. You know, a lot of, like we said, a lot of the families are not from Darwin, here, Larrakia country. So yeah, we do a lot of bush cooking, like kangaroo tails, fish. Fish is a big thing up here with saltwater mob. But it's, yeah, we always, you know, and we also have, you know, the Western way, but our way is very important. Keep our culture alive and, you know, we don't want, you know, our babies to, yeah, learn from us and in community, as we as the first teachers and our own, you know, we are the knowledge holders, you know, our older people, and to keep that generation going.
Cool. And what kind of feedback do you get from parents and kids? Like, what's the impact that you see children's grounds having?
Well, with mine, see, with my community out in Nucky's Lagoon, we had no organisations coming in at all for a while. So it was just basically fend for yourself. But when children's ground coming in, we get a lot of acknowledgement. Like, they're so grateful, they're so thankful. You know, they're spreading the word. Yep, children's ground is here for community. Children's ground is here for the people. Yeah, I get people coming to my house now and asking, like, oh, when children's ground coming? Or, you know, they know this organization is here for community and our people, and to make us better and stronger. Yeah.
Oh, thank you. So you might have noticed we have another panelist join us as well, Aunty Steff. So I'll just give you a little rundown on Aunty Steff. So Stephanie Armstrong is her full name. She's a proud Kamilaroi woman who has strong links with the state of Victoria through family and friends. From a very early age, she looked to teach and learn. A large extended family provided her with many realities that guided her teaching. Her 35 years of experience in education provided her with the satisfaction of talking and listening to many children and their families. Aunty Steff worked at the Windanga Health Networks, sorry, I've got my cat here, Health Networks as a health and education consultant. She initiated a number of projects related to connecting with and supporting First Nations senior secondary schoolgirls, and was responsible for introducing them to a number of health careers. So with that in mind, Aunty Steff, after all of your experience of teaching, what do you see as a benefit of a First Nations education system, and why do we need one? We can't hear you, actually.
Me now?
Yeah, can hear you now.
Okay.
Do you want me to repeat that question for you, Anne?
Oh, no, I wrote it down and everything. So, yeah, and I'll just go through a little bit of my notes. It's a little bit hard when you're doing it on Zoom, but yeah, so, you know, I suppose being part of in and out of the system for so long and across, you know, different states as well, I've had the privilege of working with First Nations children and their families for so many years, generationally, and have seen those changes go up and down. You know, for me, the system has really restrained our children, you know, over the time. We've looked always, you know, constantly at the deficits over those years, and programs are always looking to fill in or fix something all the time. It's that, you know, it's again, our identity gets cut apart in different bits, just like the system is you know, in little compartments, particularly when you go into secondary education, but even, you know, in primary, you have different bits happening all the time. And we know that for us, it is that holistic, you know, of connection to country and one another and our health and wellbeing in that space. So, you know, and it doesn't privilege our voice in this space either, you know, so it's always privileging other people's ways of doing and being. And so, you know, for many different spaces, from the city right through to remote areas, you know, First Nations languages and the way we speak, whether it be Aboriginal English or Creole or a First Nations language as well, is often minimised, you know. But on the other hand, the reason for a First Nation is that we have gone now, and I've been part of the system for 40 years now, we have been trying to work in between and do things, and it hasn't worked. We still have more kids being incarcerated. We still have more kids, you know, dropping out, being within systems. You know, the focus is still looking at attendance and those sorts of things, you know, these KPIs for so long. And so it's not to say that there isn't some shining lights amongst this, but I'm talking about systems and whole systems and the way that they operate. And so it's now, you know, and it's crucial that now that we look with our elders and seniors and this last lot of generations, it's the time to do, you know, we've tried to do this other way for 40 years, you know, in my lifetime anyway. And I just think that now is the way that Children's Ground's doing the work is very much focused on First Nations knowledges, ways of being, particularly keeping language and culture alive, combining that, you know, all those elements of spirituality and our children together, because in the end point, as mother and a grandmother, I want my children and my grandchild to be happy, you know, to have a healthy, happy life. And I'm sorry to say that I've seen so many of our children being unhappy, you know, and it doesn't take much if you walk into a school or into a gate of how you see things being limited and lessened in that space. Whereas, you know, what I see with Children's Ground and what's happened is that they're opening up the space so much more. That education being on country, you know. So I hope that's, yeah, some answer to it.
Thank you. And how do you see a Cherepampa having, or what impact do you see it having, and why do you think that that is important from your perspective?
Well, look, you know, I am in the eastern states, but I do travel, you know, across Australia as well. And, you know, it's, for me, it's that it's supporting those voices that are really strong on country, and that's what needs to be, you know, constantly now coming across the other states. You know, I went to the First Nations Education Conference, so we had 2,500 First Nations people from across the world, and everyone was saying the same sorts of things that Children's Ground's doing. You know, that thing about being on country, about us being the first teachers, about seniors and elders' voice, and it was all about that strength of culture and language and joy. And I mean, the conference went over what was about 4 days in Adelaide, and you know, the whole time there was laughter and joy and music and dance and ceremony and practice. And so when you see that coming together and the understanding of where that fits, then Children's Ground is doing that work. So we just need to be able to have this platform, and hopefully our allies to support us to move further afield, you know, and to see that the leadership that Children's Ground's doing is continued. And I think it's the right time for that, because people, we have looked at those injustices and what has happened, but because we are very much strength-based, this is where we're going back to. Let's continue the way that we do things, you know, and hopefully our allies and those that have supported us will see that this way of our voice taken, that precedent is first.
I am going to go back to Kathy and Pawpaw, and I would like to ask you the same question. What do you, as you know, people who work on the grounds as well in community, what do you think is a benefit of a First Nations education system?
Because we keep the benefit, like we get to work and be in our, you know, our community. That's our safe place. And just being on country and just working together, just to, you know, making it all better, and just
working with families, making sure that they know that we're here for them, and making it a safe place.
And building us all up, you know, together as one, and just, yeah, making the community stronger too.
Cool. And Aunty, Steff, do you see that, like, the Children's Ground model working in other communities across the country as well? And how do you think that it could happen?
Yeah, and look, I know there's a couple of schools that are starting in New South Wales, or they've been going for a little while. I mean, here in Victoria, we have, you know, the Warrior Girls College, which is again First Nation run. So there have been, I'm sure, other examples across. And it's that thing, like we've just heard, is that thing about community, and that you stay together and you work together over a long period of time. It's not people coming in and out of your lives. It's this long, maintained, steady relationship of love and protection. And you heard that word of safety and feeling secure, you know. So if that's what the benefits are of having our children close, then that can be something that happens in all communities. But what I'm fearful of, and which has happened, is this this sort of big school system where we put, you know, 1,500 to 2,000 children together in a school, that's not a healthy community. You know, we're doing it for other purposes. So if you look at the Children's Ground model and looking at where you have intergeneration, you know, of elders and young people and their families together working, to me that just seems, you know, very simple in my mind, a much caring, protective way of operating. So there is no reason that can't go further. It's more about people's willingness to allow us to have, you know, this voice, which is happening sort of in some of our maybe remote areas, but I can see it quite easily happening in many other areas in our rural and our cities, you know. And we've had inner city schools, again, looking at this idea of being together. So it is something that can definitely happen if systems are willing to come to, you know, organisations like Children's Ground to say, okay, how can we spread this?
Great. Back to you, Stacey. How do you think a First Nations education system will close the gap?
Well, like I said before, the last 240 years where we've had a number of different education systems imposed upon First Nations people that haven't worked. Then I think after, you know, how long's closing the gap been going now? 20, nearly 30 years. We're still not able to close that gap. And is it something that's been imposed upon us? Of course it has. It's a measurement and a set of targets that have continually looked at the deficit model of who we are and how we're meant to achieve it. And when we don't achieve it, First Nations people are the ones that are not necessarily punished, but are called out for that. There have been a number of health indicators within closing the gap that have probably been closed. And since the recent priority reform over the last couple of years to change what those targets are and to sort of take into account the holistic approach of how we learn and live as First Nations people, then there might be some change over the next few years. But I think we need to get back to what Pauline and Cathy have spoken about and what Aunty Steff have also spoken about is this collective opportunity to learn from our elders, to learn from a system that's been around and been successful for many hundreds and thousands of years. And that also privileges what we know best, which is our community, our country, our culture, and our language. We see at Children's Ground a lot of the kids coming into their first years of learning with their parent, and that is part of what we do. It's about bringing your family along, and family learns with you and family learns beside you. They're our first teachers. Our mothers and our fathers and our aunties and our uncles and our grandparents were our first teachers, and that continues to be something that is successful for us. There is also a certain way in which we learn on country, and that country and land is everything to us. It is our law, it is our language, it's who we are, it identifies our kinship systems, our relationships with each other and other parts of the country. And those holistic learning ways, rather than as Aunty Steff has articulated, let's separate it into maths or English or science or the environment or any number of those subjects, is just not the way that children should learn. And Children's Ground approach is not necessarily just for First Nations. It can be adapted and used anywhere. We haven't had that opportunity as yet, but what we're trying to explain and encourage people to understand, this is about collective learning, this is about learning on country, this is about family, this is about learning from your elders. And we also have our Western trained teachers that work along, or educators that work alongside our First Nations educators, and that is also important because our kids have to live in both worlds. They have to learn English, they have to learn how to live in a Western system. So it is all about ensuring that they get the best of both worlds. But the leading research will always say, and this is something that we probably should do more of with closing the gap targets and reforms that are required of us, that learning in your first language, learning of instruction in your first language, this is a World Bank research outcome, is the best way to learn any other language from there or any other way. And once we understand that that is the premium way for all children to learn, then we might have some buy-in, take up. I also think there needs to be, as Aunty Steff mentioned, more of an opportunity for educators to have their voice in the system. What does that look like? Why aren't we heard? Why are our First Nations educators still considered assistants or Aboriginal education workers? They're actually teachers. They're actually cultural professors. And just because they don't have a Western certificate of education or teaching of some sort, they're not considered worthy in many cases still of that position in a system or a school, so, or an education setting. So that's another thing that I believe that the priority reforms of closing the gap need to consider is our First Nations workforce, and how well developed and how culturally sound and how culturally safe that workforce is, and how they need to be remunerated, but also recognised for the work that they already do in the space. So closing the gap, a massive piece of work that's been done by government, and I would like to think that the funding that's gone into that, the investment that's gone into that over the many years that it's been going, if we'd only used half of that money to support First Nations education schools or workplaces or settings of some sort, then we may be a lot further ahead as far as what we want to see our kids aspire to and what we want to see our kids be proud of and be a part of going forward.
Thanks, Stacey. Back to Kathy and Pawpaw. What changes have you seen in children from the children's ground sessions?
Confidence, just being able to be themselves, and just with my community at Nucky's Lagoon, we've actually helped a few families and kids. Like Stacey said, it's very important for the Western way now, in our day and age. So we've got more kids, going to school with attendance, and just being able to just enjoy, everything they have in their community and with their families, and just to, be hands-on at just, being themselves and safe, and just knowing that they have us, and the support, they have backup. So,
like Pauline said, parents are more feeling more confident bringing their kids and doing stuff with them now culturally, like
more engaged
and getting out of the community, going on our bush trips, and
because you get a lot of families too, like, who don't like to leave the community, who does, they don't feel safe coming out of their community. That's their home. So we're putting confidence back into the parents, and their kids are seeing it. So it's really good.
Since children don't come in.
And Aunty Steff, do you see the same, changes in children as well, feeling more confident and things like that when you see them participating in these cultural programs?
Yeah, and over the years too, the more that you support young people with who they are, then being proud of who they are, then they are capable of doing whatever they wish, and I can't stress enough about the joy. Do you know what I mean? Happiness and being able to have a joyful and full life, just as we've heard, you know, and that safe life, that is a human right, you know. And for First Nations people, for many years we've had to be less than and seen less than. Do you know what I mean? And so when you hear a story of children and their families feeling safe, and there's very much of joy, you know, like and happiness, you know, that's something that everyone looks for. So why can't it be also be us? And at the moment, that's not the case, you know. You know, and I would, you know, I would be happy for anyone to challenge me and go around in schools and show me, you know, schools or whatever that are producing this wholeness of a child when they're not on their country. You know, there are still those gaps within things that you know, there's not tools developed or whatever on but we understand that gratitude and humility allows us to be connected and work together. And gratitude and humility will be something that will be needed in the future when we are looking at what's happening across, and, you know, particularly with young people being stressed and anxious. It's this connectedness to country and self and one another, and this sense of gratitude and being humble in the space of helping it with one another. That is truly something that only, you know, the families and those that feel this really deeply can do. You know, it's systems don't you know, value those sorts of things, you know, reciprocity and relationships, and, you know, the respect of elders and those that bring knowledges and lived knowledges over this time within our stories. And I've seen it with my own children and grandchildren, you know, or granddaughter that I have, you know, when you bring that wholeness into their lives, they are truly joyful. And for me, that's what education is really about: bringing purpose, joy, and having a you know, a good life, which our children really, you know, is something that we really need to consider.
Thank you. I just wanted to remind everyone, we'll be wrapping up in about 15 minutes. So if you do have some questions, please put them in the Q&A box. I am going to go back to Stacey and ask her a little bit of a hard question, maybe. Stacey, can you explain how we're tracking with data and evaluation to show whether, you know, the Children's Ground model is actually having an impact to benefiting children's lives and achieving those close the gap targets?
Oh, yes, very hard question, but it's something that we're proud of doing at Children's Ground. We've actually got a research team that is basically supported and led by our First Nations people on the ground. They actually ask the questions and develop the evaluation programs that we want to see happen. We have just, well, not just, but last year we completed a 2 to 3 year evaluation report of Umbukanala, which is Central Australia Children's Ground operations. And that was a massive task in bringing together all the information that we have collected over the many years that we've been in operations, particularly in Central Australia. And that was launched last United Nations Human Rights Day last year. It's available on our website. We have a summary version as well as the full-blown report. And I think, you know, we haven't necessarily gone across all of the closing the gap targets. We have addressed such things as health and wellbeing across our 5 platforms of Children's Ground, which is early childhood or learning and wellbeing, health and wellbeing, economic development and wellbeing, culture and community development and wellbeing. And the reason we have wellbeing in every single one of our platforms is very much about how we're travelling as a community, how we're travelling as a community town camp or one of our communities that we work with. So wellbeing is a huge part of our work and what we do on a daily basis, because the number of children and families that we have interaction with come from trauma, and not only just the colonisation trauma, but trauma of every day, of getting up every day, heading into town or going to work every day, making sure that they've got a decent feed to give their kids every day, the opportunity for those kids to interact with their cousins and their family every day. So whilst we work with some of our most, I don't say disadvantaged, but those families that have suffered a lot over the last little while, those ones that do come to and access our services also access the wellbeing services that we provide. And as Aunty Steff said, and as Kathy and Paul have demonstrated, education shouldn't be a chore. It shouldn't be a chore for our children or an outcome our children or any of our families and communities need to get through. It should be something that we should relish, that we are proud to have, that we're privileged to learn our language and culture and what our country has to offer us every single day. And that should be a joy, not something that we have to put our kids through or trauma that they have to endure whilst they go to a Western system. Hence why we've built Children's Ground and why it's led by First Nations people, and our evaluation and our researches and our outcomes are addressed by First Nations people, because they're the ones that our families will speak to. And we should own, as our board has said and as our chair has said, we need to own that information. We need to have the data sovereignty for that information. We need to be able to use that information in the ways that we want to use it. And it needs to inform our practice and how we can be better and run harder and run faster so that we can produce the outcomes that we want to produce. So yeah, that's some of the work that we do, but evidence collection and research and evaluation is very much a lot of our work, and we also provide quarterly reports on what we're doing. They're also available on our website and people can access it at any time, but we're very proud of that evaluation and research, and so we should be, because we own that information, lock, stock and barrel, and it's our information that we've set up a system to collect for our people. Hopefully that's answered your question, Maddie.
Sorry to throw that one at you.
No,
I might, so we've got a few questions in the chat, so I might go to Aunty Steff to answer the first one. What do you feel should be a priority for education and care services to work towards repairing our environmental destruction?
That's an easy question, isn't it? I think we've heard those examples of people really looking in their backyard. I think sometimes we get overwhelmed by a whole lot of looking at these smaller communities, because we can all look out our front door to see what needs to happen in our communities and working together. So, I know that I saw on the news about the First Nations women rangers up in the north, the amazing work they're doing. That idea of employing more First Nations people on the ground in their own communities, it's only been a couple of years and they cut 100 to 150 Aboriginal or First Nations people across WA in the education system. 100 or 150, I can't remember, jobs just, wiped. So it's again about, to be able to work together in the environment. That's what the sort of work Children's Ground, knowing your environment and knowing, your connection to it, and you care for yourself just as you care for your country. So I think, to me, that's a priority is to be able to, it's a call for action now. It means, everyone taking that responsibility of what they do in their community, that would be. And if you can join like organisations like Children's Ground, Culture is Life, there's some really great First Nations organisations that are trying to do various work. Two-way science up in the Kimberley, that they're working together. There's some smaller communities up in the Kimberley that looking at language and curriculum development for themselves as well. And some way for these to be connected. And so I'm presuming, yeah, you know, so that people can get on and see that there's a lot of good stuff. That's the other thing is, yes, work locally, but sometimes you feel like you're the only one. So how do you then connect across? So maybe, you know, it can be organisations like Children's Grounds that, you know, constantly show the strengths that's happening across our community.
Thank you. So next question, any of you can answer this, I'm pretty sure. Do you think the same underlying principles of Children's Grounds could work in any nation and language?
I'm happy to answer that. I think so. We've you know, been working on an approach on how that's delivered and what does that look like when you go from different nation to different nation. And whilst the approach is quite simple, it's also takes time. We work on a 25-year approach, Children's Ground, and we're invited in by the community. So the community invites Children's Ground to work in a specific space or a specific community. And once we start to develop that governance model that will actually manage the leadership and the programs and the approach that you want to deliver in your community, then that is then, you know, we stay for 25 years. So it's not something that is short term. It's not just based on funding and investment. We actually work with the community on what they want to see happen in that community, whether it be early childhood, whether it be health and wellbeing, whether it's particular activities that you want to deliver, but also the systems that you want to change in your community. What do you want to see happen in a Western construct that you want to see changed? And that sort of thing takes time, and we know that takes time. It takes more than 3 years or a funding cycle of the government. It takes a lifetime. It takes a generation, if not 2 generations. And once that starts to change and occur, then it happens quite naturally and it just rolls. We can see the impact it has not only on the people that we have directing activities with or direct relationships with, but we also see that massive change in that community start to change as well. So yes, I think it can.
Great, thanks, Stacey. A question for our top end mob. What do the kids teach you?
Teach us a lot, because there's a lot of different languages in the community. So we're learning new things every day off our kids. Me personally, you know, makes love, you know, because these young kids, they need more of, you know, people like us. So it teaches me to love my job and to, you know, build these kids up, because they're the next generation. But we're learning off each other every day, because there's a lot of, so you got 10 clans in one community. So these kids are teaching me languages, teaching me to go, you know, what their bush tucker is and what they, you know. So well, yeah, learning something new every day. Taking us out, you know, little things, you know, like, yeah. But it teaches, yeah, just everything, happiness, love, everything, you know, just makes me love my job more, just learning off them every day, off each other.
Yeah. And just knowing that keeping them safe, that we're here for them, gives us, you know, more kind of learning from them as well and their needs. Because each child, you know, come into the sessions and that with different types of what they want to learn or what they want us to learn from them is important when we let them take control, you know. It makes us feel good,
Good,
happy, and, you know, yeah.
Yeah, learning every you know, everything. And once the kids, you know, they hear us say something in their language, you see them jumping around, getting, you know, happy. Oh, look, they can say that, they can do this. So, yeah, love
We're
it.
learning from them as well.
As much as they're learning from us.
Thank you. That's a really nice note to wrap up on. If you check the chat, we've just posted a subscribe to our mailing list link if you want to keep learning more about Children's Ground and what we're up to. Stacey, I just wanted to ask you one more thing. In what other ways can people support Children's Grounds?
Yes, if you're a First Nations educator of any form, whether you're a teacher or a professor or a linguist, or you go every day to a school and help out in your school, and you want to know more about First Nations education systems, we have a network called Educator Pumper. All these ladies are a member of that, and we're having a meeting in June. Please just drop us a line on our email address, which is located on our website, and we'll send you an invite out. We're hoping to all get together in Central Australia again. It's a really special space for everybody to go out. We do a bit of camping, bush tucker, we do a lot of laughter, and there's a great opportunity to connect with like-minded people. And we would love to hear what you're doing in your space, in your school, in your education space. And we would also love to hear how we can, you know, form this movement, this national movement for a First Nations education system. It's got to come from us. It's got to come from the ground up. We've got to really, you know, pressure others, mainly the governments, to start to think differently and to start to take notice of us. And as all these women have said on this webinar, to actually use our voice and use our influence to make sure that this happens in our lifetime.
So everyone, just want to say a big thank you to Stacey, Aunty, Steff, Kathy and Paw for taking time out of their day and jumping on and answering these questions. And also a big thank you to everyone who did jump on and come and watch this panel today. So we hope to see you again next time. Bye.
Thanks, ladies. Awesome. See
Thank you.
Thompson.
See you.
Thank
Bye.
you. Bye.
Bye.